Today we're going to completely decode the exact mechanics of personal transformation, and we're doing it by looking at a genuinely fascinating case study, a night security guard named Ethan. Now, I want to be clear right up front. This isn't just some feel-good story about getting a better job. No, we're doing a meticulous breakdown of how a human mind actually transitions from complete defeat to total empowerment. So if you have ever felt stuck or overlooked or just kind of invisible in your own life, you're going to want to pay close attention to this because the architecture of change we're about to explore is entirely replicable.
All right, let's set the scene and establish a baseline here. Picture this. Every single night, while the rest of the city was inside brightly lit office buildings chasing down their dreams, Ethan was standing outside in the cold. He was literally guarding the doors of a building he fully believed he could never actually enter. People would just walk right past him. No eye contact, no second glance. He was practically invisible. But what our source material reveals is this intense, silent war that was raging inside his head. One freezing winter night, he's staring at his tired reflection in a dark window, and this deeply haunting question just hits him out of nowhere. What if this is all my life will ever be? It's a terrifying thought, right? It's the sound of a mind standing right on the edge of just permanently giving up.
But to really understand how he even got to that edge in the first place, we have to rewind and look at his programming. Growing up, Ethan lived in a household where money was just constantly evaporating. The fridge was usually pretty empty, bills were always late, and he was heavily conditioned by that environment. The adults around him repeated one specific phrase over and over again: life is hard. And, this wasn't just a passing complaint on a bad day. It became his fundamental worldview. He was conditioned to believe that life was simply meant to feel heavy forever. When you hear that enough as a kid, your brain just accepts it as an unchangeable law of physics.
And those internal beliefs, they rapidly snowballed into real-world consequences. Let's look at how this played out. At just 18, Ethan drops out of college because his family desperately needs financial help. Just making that decision alone completely crushed his confidence, especially watching all his friends move forward while he stepped back. Then, he faces weeks of endless job rejections, which, of course, just further validates that deeply held internal belief that he's stuck. Finally, he accepts this totally exhausting, low-paying night security job. Why? Well, because as the source text so profoundly points out, survival leaves absolutely zero room for pride. He wasn't just trapped in a job. He was trapped in this sequence of defeats that confirmed all of his deepest fears.
But here is where things start to get really interesting. During those long, empty nights, a massive observation happened. Ethan spent his shifts watching the successful people coming in and out. Businessmen confidently talking about investments and new opportunities. And by watching them, Ethan had this sudden epiphany. His environment wasn't actually his biggest trap. The literal physical doors he was guarding weren't what was keeping him out. His mindset was. He realized there was this massive psychological gap, a mindset chasm between where he was at and where the people walking past him were operating from.
And that gap brilliantly illustrates a stark psychological contrast. Ethan noticed that successful people simply expected life to get better. They operated every day from a baseline of impending growth. On the flip side, the struggling mindset, which was his mindset, expected life to just stay difficult forever. He realized with absolute horror that he had spent years of his life mentally preparing for continuous failure instead of success. Think about how much energy it takes to constantly brace for impact. That realization was deeply disturbing to him, but honestly, it was exactly the shock to the system he needed.
And that painful realization triggered a massive internal shift. It was 3 a.m. on another lonely shift, and he just opened a notebook and wrote down this exact sentence: "My future will not look like my past." Now, this wasn't just some burst of fleeting 3 a.m. motivation that fades by breakfast. It was a sudden, heavy assumption of radical responsibility. For the literal first time in his life, Ethan stopped waiting for external circumstances to somehow magically save him. He decided right then and there to take complete control of rebuilding himself from the ground up.
So the crucial takeaway here is that massive life shifts don't usually start with massive actions. Discipline always begins small. The very next morning, instead of just collapsing into bed exhausted, Ethan implemented these seemingly insignificant daily micro habits. We're talking just 15 minutes of exercise, reading and learning online, listening to motivational speeches in his headphones while on shift. Now, let's be super clear. Did these actions do absolutely anything to change his bank account that day? No. Externally, he was still totally broke and exhausted. But internally, he was laying the bricks for a completely new mental foundation.
What he was really doing was tapping into a foundational concept, compounding discipline. While his coworkers were wasting hours complaining and his friends were literally laughing at him for not partying or being distracted anymore, Ethan just quietly kept at it. Compounding discipline is all about those tiny, small daily improvements that eventually create massive transformation. But the catch is, they have to be sustained in silence. He utterly refused to stay addicted to comfort and excuses. He understood that the mindset has to change everything before the external results ever actually appear.
But, there is a universal truth we all have to face. Resilience is completely theoretical until life actually tests it. You can read all the personal development books in the world, but the real exam comes when everything falls apart. For Ethan, this ultimate test arrived entirely out of the blue when his father was severely injured in a construction accident. In a split second, that fragile stability Ethan had been working so hard to build was thrown completely out the window. And the pressure just mounted in this devastating cascade of crises. Instantly, the family loses their main source of income. Then the hospital bills start aggressively piling up. To try and hold it all together, Ethan is forced to take on constant, soul-draining overtime shifts. The sheer physical and mental exhaustion just completely breaks him, destroying that newly found motivation entirely. He finds himself right back out in the cold, feeling like life is slowly crushing him all over again. Honestly, this is the exact moment where the old version of Ethan would have absolutely thrown in the towel. And right as he was sitting in the rain one night, emotionally broken and truly wanting to give up on the whole thing, his phone rang. It was his mom. She didn't have any money to give him. She didn't have a magic solution to their problems. All she gave him were these 3 simple words: "I'm proud of you." And that one sentence anchored him so deeply. It acted as this lifeline that immediately reconnected him to all that quiet work he had been doing in the dark. That emotional climax proved something so vital, and it brings us to our ultimate takeaway: the invisible return on investment. You see, his real growth wasn't external success yet. The ROI was the internal strength that kept him moving forward when the old him would have completely quit. Strength matters infinitely more than temporary success, because that strength is the actual engine that will eventually manufacture the success down the line. So, reinvigorated, Ethan just doubled down. Over the next 2 years, he kept up his silent transformation. He utilized absolutely every single free moment on that security shift. While everyone else was scrolling aimlessly on their phones, Ethan was meticulously studying business and communication. He consciously worked on leveling up his speaking skills. He focused heavily on mastering emotional control. He read leadership books constantly. He was literally building a high-level corporate toolkit while still wearing a security uniform. And eventually, you just can't hide that kind of growth forever. This invisible discipline finally became visible. A manager inside the company noticed Ethan. But he didn't just see a security guard. He saw a sharp young guy reading leadership books instead of wasting time. They sparked up a conversation, and that manager very quickly recognized the caliber of Ethan's mindset and his unshakable consistency.
Suddenly, this entire timeline comes into crystal clear focus, from dropping out of college to those isolating night shifts to that critical 3 a.m. mindset shift, and finally, the breakthrough. Because of that interaction, the manager actually offered Ethan an administrative support role within the company. Now, it wasn't some glamorous CEO position. It was a humble beginning, but it officially, cleanly broke the cycle of his past. He was finally inside the building.
And once he was inside, Ethan was practically unstoppable. Why? Because all those years of struggle had already given him elite mental training. Long hours? Please, he was used to grueling night shifts. High pressure? The guy had survived crushing poverty and intense family emergencies. Corporate pressure didn't scare him even a little bit. This massive mental advantage allowed him to rise rapidly through promotions, earning just immense respect from colleagues who had absolutely no idea where he even started.
The absolute coolest, most cinematic part of this entire journey is the physical realization of that mental shift. One evening, Ethan walked confidently through that lobby as a highly respected professional. He literally walked right through the exact same doors he used to stand outside of in the freezing cold. He wasn't lucky. He systematically, patiently rebuilt himself, one disciplined day at a time, until the external world had absolutely no choice but to match his internal reality.
So, we end today with a core truth. Your current situation does not dictate your final destination. Life rewards consistency slowly, but it rewards it surely. I want to leave you with this one question to think about. Will your future look like your past? What painful daily consistency are you willing to build in silence today to ensure that your tomorrow looks entirely different? The power to change the narrative is literally right there in your hands. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Now go start your own silent transformation today.